There's nothing quite like the sound or feel of a well-struck chip shot. The video today is going to be about how to strike the chips better, but also to avoid one big failing, and that's hitting it fat. Probably the most destructive shot you can hit around the green, apart from a hosel rocket of course, is hitting it fat. Now, just burying the club, having the ball bounce 5-6 steps in front of you maximum, never reach your target. Absolute killer. Now, there are a couple of schools of thought on how to fix this, and the bad news for you today is that neither of them are incorrect. But at the same time, neither of them is fully correct either. This video is going to explain to you how to make either or both of them work, and I would give you an idea of how maybe you figure out who you are and which approach you should take to get the best results around the green. Let's get one thing straight very, very early on. The number that a TrackMan or a Foresight quad spits out is not the attack angle of the club when the club first touches the ground. It is the attack angle when the club touches the ball. Now consider this for a second. If your attack angle is very, very shallow when it touches the ball, but you've touched the ground before the golf ball, that attack angle will have been much steeper when it touched the ground, and it will have deflected upwards into the ball. Okay, and if it's a chunky shot, that is an errorful shot, it wasn't fat because it was shallow. It also wasn't really fat because it was steep. Okay, there's a mismatch going on there. We'll explain more as we go on. But I just want to get the point across that the number at the ball is not the number when the club touches the ground. The only time the attack angle at the ball is the true attack angle is when the club touches the ground after the golf ball, because the ground has had no chance to interfere. Now, it just so happens that most wedge shots, the club just touches down that little bit early, most of the time. For some players earlier than others, for some players very, very late. But the majority, the club touches the ground before the golf ball to some degree, which means the attack angle at the ball is a deflected attack angle. Now, people need to stop saying that you've hit it fat because you're too steep. You've hit it fat because you're too shallow. All right, there's a mismatch like I mentioned earlier, and this is where we're going to change things up for you. Now, I'm going to try not to get too overcomplicated with this because it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole and get very, very lost. I'm going to simplify it down best I can. If you want the club to touch the ground before the ball, and a lot of players do, I kind of like it to touch down slightly before the golf ball. It gives me some comfort, feel like I've got some margin. If you want to do that, your attack angle cannot be excessively steep. It needs to be relatively shallow. Okay, that club will get deflected by the ground to some degree, but if it's coming down at quite a steep angle, it'll be deflected more. Or if the angle isn't changing very quickly, which it can do, it's going to bury into the ground. Okay, so a steep attack angle doesn't really match with the contact point on the ground behind the golf ball. Okay, I've got a camera running down in front here in slow-mo, so I'm going to try and put a couple of shallow ones on there. And I'm going to try and have this club touch down, maybe a golf ball behind the actual golf ball I'm hitting. But the attack angle will need to be relatively low numbers, and it can function perfectly well. Okay, so that popped up truly, so that was way, way back. We'll jump to the video in a second, but you're going to see it a long way before the ball, probably overdone slightly, but you know, it's a video. We try and exaggerate a little bit, so I'm going to touch down just a little bit closer to this, but still before. Okay, a little better, significantly before it though. And the ball flight's fine. Yeah, it's higher, it's softer, it's not spinning that much, but I'm exaggerating just a little bit. I'm going to nudge it a little bit closer. Going to go slightly closer to ball contact. Okay, so much lower, much nippier. You'll see in the video now, if you take a look, that things are a little bit closer to the golf ball, but I believe still before the golf ball. Right, so that was early contact point, matching early ground contact with a shallower attack matches up. If I want to make later ground contact, I can and should be a little bit steeper. Okay, so I'm looking to make sure that I'm shifting probably towards target a little bit more shaft lean on it, and I'm actually going to try and make contact with the ground at slightly after the golf ball, but not before. And this will be the match up here. Okay, I'd be interested to see the slow-mo on that one. I think that was pretty much at it. Obviously it came out pretty low. Go same again, so looking for more ball first contact, steep attack. Just popped a little bit. I don't think that was late enough, to be honest with you. It was still fine. Let's really try and get ball first, see if we can pick it up on that camera. And the poppy one. Managed to get some stuff trapped between the club and the ball. That's supposed to happen when it's steep. We'll leave it in there. Okay, definitely going ground contact way ahead of the golf ball this time. I think we look back at that. Still don't think it's ahead of the golf ball. I think it's very, very close, but very difficult to chunk it from there. So let's start to look at the practicality and maybe the technical points to make either of these methods work. Now you understand that early ground contact can work and late ground contact can also work if you match your attack angle to it. So let's take a look at how to hit the wider, shallower shot. Setup wise, I'm going to keep things pretty normal, pretty much ball center, weight, it's going to be about 50-50. The key things here though are backswing positioning and transition to make sure that nothing gets too narrow. Because I'm going to keep my right arm longer, trail arm, left for a lefty, and I'm going to try and avoid changing my wrist angles excessively. So maybe a very small change, definitely very little change here. So a real feeling of width and pushing away from my chest and not elevating the club too high above my hands. So that keeps width in the swing. In transition, I'm trying to make sure I maintain that. I don't add any wrist angle in the downswing or elbow. So essentially I create quite a nice flat wide circle. Now the pivot needs to be strong. Now pivot wise you could move towards target a little bit, that would be okay, or you can stay very centered. Obviously if you move towards target a little bit, it will steepen your approach slightly, but it'll still be relatively shallow. You have some good margin forwards and backwards here. I should be able to hit a perfectly good shot with a very centered rotational pivot, and also I can try and hit a little bit closer to the ball and even go towards ball first by moving more towards target while maintaining that width both sides of the golf ball. Okay, so you can see kind of mid-flight, moderate, quite nice. Little floatier than you'll see from the steep. Okay, so it feels very simplistic. No wrist change, no trail arm shortening, keeping the width, and a nice strong rotational pivot through to follow through. That'll deliver maybe anywhere from 2 down to 5 down, it kind of as a stock. It will produce a slightly higher launch, so we're talking a 30 to 35 window. You'll lose a little bit of spin, but you'll gain in land angle and gain control that way. Let's take a look at the basic mechanics for the steep. Okay, so setup wise, I'm going to do pretty similar stuff. I'm not going to cheat and put the ball back. Obviously you could, to create steepness, play the ball back foot, make sure the hands are forwards, all that stuff. I'll show you the mechanics, right? So setup, I'm going to be pretty neutral, ball in the center. Now, backswing wise, I'm going to make sure my left shoulder moves downwards, vertically towards my left foot. That's going to add a lot of steepness in my shoulder tilt. It's going to move my head downwards and forwards towards the target. So I'm getting lower and closer to the target. That creates a lot of steepness in the downswing. Second thing I'm going to add is more wrist hinge. I'm going to load the club more. I'm going to load it more vertically. Now having steeper shoulders is going to help that club go vertical, but I'm going to add to it by adding some wrist hinge. I'm really going to start to get that left thumb pointing upwards. So I'm going to try and max out the steepness with my shoulder tilt, my head position and my wrist hinge. That's going to put me in a place where this club is ready to come crashing into the ground at or ahead of the golf ball. So I'm not going to look to shallow this out at all and get the club out of the ground. I'm going to try and stick it in there a little bit. I'm going to have the face slightly open, take a little bit of speed off it. So left shoulder's tilting down, wrist hinging the club vertically. I'm going to stay forwards. Okay, just came off a little bit hot. Tend to find it with this steeper one. I'm going to try and leave it in the ground again. Okay, better, but I'm going to show you how to soften it. So for me, that's just too quick. Now I can soften the flight a little bit by essentially creating the same backswing. Half of the downswing is the same, so I'm going to transition the same way. I'm going to stay downwards, forwards, but from here I'm going to start to extend and push up away from the ground and actually re-hinge my wrist a little bit. So get the club out of the ground and soften the flight a touch. Now, for me there's a conflict here. I'll hit the shot first and explain why. Steep backswing, up and away from the ground to stop it digging and soften the flight a little bit. Okay, so a much better shot. Here's the conflict. I've put in all this steepness, so left shoulder's gone down, hinged it nice and vertical, swing plane's very steep. From here, I get into delivery and I start to push up and extend and start to rehinge my wrists. I start to take away steepness from the swing. So my question is, am I really gaining as much steepness as maybe you think you need, or am I actually ending up in more of a moderate middle ground? And is there an easier way to achieve that moderate middle ground? Am I working unnecessarily? I think so, but obviously it's up to you to figure that out. Now, of course, like with everything, there's a middle ground, all right? So relatively steep, no, neutral. 5 to 10 degrees down, pretty good window. At 5 to 10 degrees down, you can touch the ground before the golf ball. We're just not talking this much, right? We're talking in here somewhere. So I can be a little bit steep, just look for a little bit of a guarantee. I can move towards target and amount. I can still touch the ground before the golf ball without worrying about laying the sod over it. So I can give myself some margin as far as early ground contact with some steepness in there if too shallow is scary, and if you're worried about the club bouncing up into the golf ball. There is a neutral, and that's pretty much where I live in my coaching. Do I teach people shallow? Yes. Do I teach people steep? Yes, I do that too. But I understand the fundamental matchups in there. And I'm not going to profess that one is much better than the other. In the perfect world, I'd have someone getting the best of both, like in the middle. Some steepness to kind of give you some guarantee of strike with a little bit of margin built in there. It sounds good, doesn't it? And if you want to find your way to that neutral round, just kind of mix and match the things I've spoken about as far as making it shallow, making it steeper. I think maybe the most important takeaway from this is that there is not one way to do it. You need to recognize, are you a shallow player, a steep player? Do you expose a lot of bounce? Do you release the club fast, which is going to typically make you too shallow? Do you lean the club a lot? Okay, you need to start trying to factor these things in and figure out who you are. I take comfort in being able to land the club on the ground before the ball without concern about it going 2 or 3 feet in front of me or bouncing it and hitting it 20 yards over. I take comfort in that. My focus is primarily ground, I'm not thinking ball. And how I use the ground is important to me, but that's just me. If you want to go ball first, go the steep route. If you want margin, as in big margin on the ground, go the shallow route. You just can't be steep with early contact, and you can't really be shallow trying to get late contact because the club will never get to the ground. Okay, now if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe. About 85% of people that watch my videos do not subscribe at this point. So if you're one of them, subscribe, support the channel, let's grow it and get more content to you.